Hey there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to another episode of The Call to View. It is my favorite episode time again. Another weekly edition with Bill Duvendack, and him and I break down some pretty interesting discussions today as we talk about Beltane, Samhain, sex, death, as well as your usual monthly up and coming predictions. Please do check down in the description for the timeline if you want to get to certain points very quickly. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode as we reveal to you what's coming in the month ahead and how to prepare yourself best for it, as well as discuss some of these ancient traditions. I'm your host, Adam Knox, and remember, live deliciously. Bill, happy Beltane, sir.
Happy Samhain, sir. It's the astrological day of it. How fortuitous.
Yes, exactly. It's almost like we or the gods had this one planned for our timing.
Yeah, fancy that. Divine order. Huh.
Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk? It's already been a busy time, though. We've had Pagan Freedom Day here in South Africa, so there's been a little bit of movement. And I don't know if you got a catch on it, but I did an interview last week with Damon Leff here in South Africa. And it was quite a bit of a discussion around the political narratives around witches and witch hunts in our country. And, you know, that journey. And one of the things that we kind of got to a speaking point of is that power of how Freedom Day here falls in correlation to when they established the Pagan Freedom Day, which was on the 27th now. And it's kind of a nice balance because at the same time, we had that kind of discussion with Beltane. And for that live broadcast, it's been a kind of an interesting one. How did you find that experience? Do you find you get a lot of these requests from the community to kind of bring your wisdom out because you're very popular? I'm just gonna be pointing that out. I've become quite a fan. Like the more I get to work with you, the more I get to see your face pop up everywhere.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Since coming to Europe, not as much. But in the States, I presented on these and related themes everywhere from high schools to colleges to public libraries, all kinds of organizations. And it's exactly what you said. People just want to know because they don't. And they see the terms or they see the concepts in Hollywood or on local television stations, but they're smart enough to know that that's a product that's being sold. So they want to know like what the real deal is.
Yes, I think that's so useful because one of the things that came up in that discussion, kind of the reason that I was bringing it out is because we're looking at how when they started the Pagan Rights Alliance in our country, one of the big reasons for that is because there used to be an occult unit that literally would get you arrested if you practiced or looked at anything occult or wasn't part of the Christian narrative. And when, you know, the freedom of religious rights came into place, that they were disbanded and many of them formed these Christian war ministries to kind of like fuel that propaganda that is out there. And that kind of adds to the misnarrative. And I think we're now at a time where they want to get the right information because that generation is kind of dying out. That narrative is dying out. People now have access to internet. They get access to shows like this, books like yours, and all this material is now available. And people can go, wait, there's rubbish here. Do I have to follow that primitive narrative? One of the ones, and we've had this discussion before when we talked about the differences in the hemispheres. Let's quickly have an intro dive before we get into this month's kind of predictions, because it is Beltane, it is Samhain. And, you know, one of the things that we pointed out as well, this is the time of the thinning of the veil. What would be the way for someone new to this to kind of get into that? Let's just say they want to practice and they want to understand, why do I even practice, and what are some ways I can celebrate or get into this? What would be the advice?
So now we get into the real strong differences and details between Beltane and Samhain. Because for Samhain, it's actually a little easier to work with the veil being so thin, because it's all about honoring your ancestors or honoring those that came before you. So you could take a trip to dead relatives' graves. Or one of my favorite practices is that of a dumb supper, where
Yeah.
you go through your regular meal at dinner or lunch, preferably at night,
Mm.
but you set a full plate of food out for the deceased loved ones that you're inviting there to join you for food, and you eat the whole meal in silence. And then when you're done, you take the plate of food outside and give it as an offering to local wildlife or the nature that's in the area. And
Mm.
sometimes people will put pictures of the deceased loved ones there. Sometimes they will have items that were particularly meaningful to the deceased. They'll have those there as well.
Mm. Very strong
And
honoring
this
of
is
the dead.
where you really get yeah, and you get some flexibility, especially where you're at, because a lot of those traditions originated in Africa, and we see their remnants and their traces in the Afro-Caribbean system.
Oh, interesting.
So it's, and I point this out because it's very regional too.
Mm.
You know, the way that people in America practice it are not the same as the way people in Europe do. I've
Yes.
seen people in Europe are more likely to go to a cemetery or a graveyard
Mm.
and decorate loved ones' graves, whereas in the States, they'll just do it at their kitchen table and like have a picture of the loved one there.
Okay. Okay.
So there's all kinds of indigenous practices based on where people are to honor the ancestors. And that's great for Samhain because that veil is thinner. So spirit contact is stronger and more frequent. Now
Mm.
for Beltane though, the veil is still thin, but it's all about fertility and life.
Yeah.
So the practices that have to do with that are a lot different. The Beltane pole, the maypole, as it's
Yes.
sometimes called, is commonly used. Uh, Oftentimes, people will just do little rituals for fertility, and that can either be biological fertility or fertility of ideas,
Mm.
or as working professionals know, you get a lot of new projects in the first part of the year. So you could do rituals that those come to fruition like they're supposed to or better than expected.
That's brilliant. It's also a nice correlation that, and it's kind of appropriate that I'm wearing black and you're wearing white.
It is very much so.
I just realized that as we kind of said that as it matched, because it's very much where the one kind of celebrates the death or the ending of the cycle, the other one celebrates the beginning, or the promotion around that. And I've always had this kind of correlation that I find that a lot of traditions, magically, to get into them, it's often the death deity that acts in many ways as a doorway to that mystery. But at the same time, I find it's sexual energy that acts as the facilitator that helps you pass the veil many times, your ability to transmute sexual energy and go throughout those processes. So it's funny how there's this handshake between life and death that is always kind of happening and occurring. What are some useful deities if you're in the, let's just say you're in the West, or you're here in South Africa and these parts of the world, and you're looking at celebrating Samhain, and you're connecting with the ancestors, and there's many traditional practices here on doing that. And I'm not just talking about classic spiritualisms, but the way the Sangamas practice the concept of ancestors are so deeply embedded in the tradition that even members of that culture that still associate even to Christianity still refer to their relationship with the ancestors. And sometimes there's a bit of a disjoint and a struggle that they're trying to resolve. But now you have a lot of people that don't. They don't necessarily, maybe they appreciate that, but they want to deepen their exercise. What are maybe some useful deities that they could be connecting with?
So there's a couple of different answers to that. The first one is deities associated with those festivals. And the second answer are just deities that are extra strong at the time of the thin veil.
Okay.
So let's start off with that one. Any deity that has to do with traveling between the worlds is exceptionally strong right now. So you're looking at Akate, you're looking at Anubis, you're looking at Mercury or Hermes, any of those that travel the planes, and Nana could even be argued in that because of the descent of Anana.
All right. Yes.
So any deities that are crossroad deities, Papa Legba, Baron Samedi, Baron Gede, even though they kind of align more with the death side, they do facilitate that psychopomp role in travel. So any of them would be good for either one.
All right. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So regardless of where I'm at, I could still find success working with them for a position of making contact with the ancestors, crossing the veil, things like astral projection, stuff like that, all a good time for it. And when we get specifically to the tradition.
So when we get to the tradition, this actually makes it a little easier for people to work with, because like you said, Samhain is more death related and Beltane is more life related. So with Beltane, you get deities that are associated with creativity and life. So Aphrodite, Venus, Hathor, Isis, Freya, any of those that have to do with fertility, not just biological fertility, but a fertile imagination, fertile creativity. Any of those apply here. Dionysus, the Green Man, any of those are very Beltane. But then for Samhain, you get more of the death gods. So you get Osiris, you get the Morrigan, you get Pluto or Hades, any of those that have to do with the death and dying process. Santa Muerte could easily be in that category too.
Yes.
So that's where the differences come in. And I'm glad you mentioned sex being the common trait or a connecting cord between the two, because Samhain is more sex in the name of procreation. Beltane is more recreational sex.
Interesting. That's not an obvious highlight, I think, for a lot of people. Yes. Can you touch a bit more on that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and really, I think in French they have a term for the orgasm that means the little death.
Le petit mort. Yes. The
right.
Little death. It's so true. Because again, one of the concepts, if we look at the concepts in sex magic, it's that death of the personality. It's that giving that up, completely letting go, completely, which is also one of the fundamental principles of magic, right? It's only when I completely release my need for the thing that I'm able to attain the thing, because I'm no longer in that vibration of need or that dependency, holding on, really affirming my lack. And I've given that up. I have died to it, and I've gone into the complete surrender. And I think that's also where even the right-hand principle of surrender can be considered as a magical idea. It's just oftentimes described differently. I liked, there was a meta frame that I once came across that really resonated with me around the death current. And it was this idea of giving to death that which no longer belongs to life. So anything that I've worked through, any journey, any process, anything that is giving that up and surrendering it completely, so that the cup can be emptied before it can now be filled. And that was, again, such a useful idea. I need to give up And this is actually goes back to there was a co-editing video that I watched the one time, and he pointed out something interesting in the piece that I just caught on the side, where he said that unless you completely exhausted the need, you've not really completed the work. And I resonate with that idea because, again, like, unless you've died to the current reality, you cannot give birth to the new reality, which is, I think, one of those subtle lessons that most people don't kind of recognize. But I think I like that kind of play idea around it, but that's just because of my own spare kind of approach to certain forms of magic, if I can put it like that. Do you but this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, because that dark veil component of sexuality, and it almost has that play. It's the one is almost like the carnal BDSM, so to speak, to quote kind of Stephen Flowers in that one, versus the more tantric, playful approach to sexuality, which I think both have their place. And I find that sometimes if we get too stuck in the one or the other, we become imbalanced. It's the old.
Well, yeah. And the difference between the two is really the difference between Western traditions and Eastern traditions. Eastern traditions more use sex as a way to commune with Godhead, or to escape consciousness, or the liberation of the self or the soul, or whatever fancy terms you want to put on it. Yes. In the West, sex is treated as a tool. You want to commune with God while you're getting fucked, go ahead. You don't, that's fine too. Yes. You want to charge a sigil with it, go right ahead. In the East, that would be taboo. Here, that's how you get stuff done, because humans are tool-using creatures.
Exactly.
So I agree with you that nobody should get locked into one or the other, because sex is just the gateway that opens up those potential roads, either to connect with the divine or to create success in your own life.
Yes. I think it's kind of like the yoga principle of bhakti yoga, right? There's that point of devotion. There's a period in which one kind of dedicates themselves completely to one aspect of the craft, or one aspect to one's path, simply because I think, the neocortex only takes 2,000 bits of information, cerebellum 400. So we can only focus on a limited amount of data at a certain time. So we need to devote ourselves, and through the process of devotion, the process of identification comes. And as we progress through our upward spiral through the different paths in the magical traditions, it's only through that deep involvement that we get to the underpinning patterns. We first see the shape of the Buddha, and then we see the energetic pattern behind the Buddha and how it matches the pattern behind the Christ and the Osiris and the Lucifer. And it's this progressive model that allows us to see the masks and then develop the underlining current that actually evolves us, that we recognize, oh, this is the self-projection on that tradition. And when I'm able to see beyond the veil, and this is even a principle in Martinism, is one of the three treasures, is the mask, learning to utilize the mask as an instrument. Because I find that's also the problem with a lot of people in their spirituality versus magic. There's this idea of, oh, I need to be one with everything, which is almost very right-hand in its thinking. I have to have this infinite love, which we know is not always a realistic thing, but it's an effective model from a psychic point of influence. Because if I'm one with everything, that means I can pace and lead everything from an NLP point of view. I have rapport, psychic rapport, I can manipulate it. But we understand also in relationships, that's why relationships fail, because too much unity is too much love, but too much love means no attraction. Because there's no duality, there's none of this opposites. And it's the opposites that creates the tension, that klipothic tension, but that can also be the power of attraction, which again, I believe is why dark magic or left-hand path magic or working with the tree of death is sometimes more powerful in terms of immediate manifest results versus just working with the tree of life and that kind of higher intellectual refined. It's kind of like you don't know, you know when peace is around, you feel peace, but you don't feel need. When peace is absent, then you suddenly feel the need and you're suddenly pushed. Then it becomes larger than life because that Maslowian hierarchy pulling you down into that. So it's a far more visceral an experience for us. This is such a juicy piece of conversation, because like you did the piece on astrology and sex. inside of the recent piece. And I do hope that Michelle releases that so other people can see that in the future. So if anybody's listening that, if you missed that, you missed an interesting discussion. Hopefully, I think Bill has a product or something out of there. If you don't, please bring one out, because it's a juicy kind of piece of subject. But staying on that kind of development trends, because now we're starting the month off at a pretty good step. We're starting off with this, and then on top of that, there's supermoon as well. Mm-hmm. And I know this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. And I think, it gets annoying when you see every meme about supermoon. It's like it's trying to compete with Mercury retrograde memes. And it looks like
supermoon. Oh God!
What is
If you had to pick something to change, supermoon would be it.
Yes.
Because a lot of people out there think that it's a marketing tool.
Okay.
They're using the term supermoon to sell a product. When in reality, that has nothing to do with it. Supermoon is a phrase that's been around for decades. It just had different iterations.
Okay.
It wasn't always called a supermoon. The coining of the word supermoon dates back, I think, to the early 80s, and an astrologer did it, and astronomers picked up on it and took it.
Oh, right.
And the supermoon is just when that full moon is happening at the perigee point, which is the closest point between the moon and the earth.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So it's actually like a scientific thing.
Okay.
It's not a marketing gimmick. It's
an astronomical specific event.
Right. So every time supermoon comes up, now people are desensitized to it, and they're even cynical about it without even realizing that you're being cynical towards science. So it's just don't.
Yeah, do your research.
Right.
Yes.
Now, for workers like us and for people checking this out, it means that the moon's influence is extra stronger than it would be if it was a non-supermoon.
Okay.
So we had a supermoon at the end of April, which just so happened to correspond with when Pluto was beginning retrograde. Then we're going to have a supermoon at the end of May, and there's going to be a supermoon at the end of June.
Okay.
So basically from approximately April 25th until about the 30th of June, the 1st of July, that is a huge window where each one of those full moons is going to have extra potential. They're going to be extra strong. So anything that's timed from a lunar perspective is going to have bigger results.
So that's interesting. Any advice on like a bit of a pre-planning for that? Like what is our next one that we're kind of leading up to? What does that connect to?
So of course the one coming up is the exception to the rule.
Yes, of course it would be.
That is the one at the end of May, and it's a supermoon. And it's a lunar eclipse.
Oh, interesting.
We have our first of two eclipses for the cycle in the first part of the year.
Yes.
Now, lunar eclipses are when internal change will happen, and they happen on the full moon. So then solar eclipses happen on the new moon, and they trigger external changes.
Okay.
Now, I had to break this down to answer your question.
Yes. All right. Got the frame.
So, right. So with that lunar eclipse, if you've got a good thing going magically and you don't want the eclipse energy to fuck it up, or you want to do something, but you're kind of nervous because of the lunar eclipse coming up, avoid any magical work 10 days around that eclipse.
All right.
So avoid starting any new magical work approximately 10 days before and 5 to 10 days after.
Okay.
You can still do magic work during that time, but your results are going to be distorted.
All right.
And keep in mind, lunar eclipses, which is the one at the end of May, is internal. So you might ask for gnosis from your holy guardian angel. You do the ritual on the eclipse and you get the gnosis, but it's not clearly given to you. It's given to you as a riddle or something that your mind thought was a small project. The gnosis that you receive is way over the top, too large for it.
Oh, I see. I see. So a pretty hectic time. And
right. So the energy is kind of unstable and it's distorted.
okay.
So if you want to do something, avoid it for about that 10 to 15 day window, and you should be fine. But also, since it's a lunar eclipse, don't look for external manifestations. Okay, it's going to be internal realizations.
So just out of curiosity, if you're in my part of the world and you've just gotten that Samhain death current going, could this also actually be supportive to that death current in terms of letting go or finding, shall we say, inner narcissism and inner projections, and maybe useful in terms of divining and figuring out what those might be, these false filtrations in your belief systems?
That would actually be probably the best or one of the best uses for that energy.
Okay.
What you just described.
So
because the way that it would play out, let's use internal narcissism. The way it would play out is you would say something to someone and their reaction would be over the top, but it would make it so obvious to you that you couldn't miss the sign in the conversation. Or you have a dream where something small that you believe or something small that you have is blown out of proportion into something huge, not to scare you, but to draw your attention to it.
Okay. So kind of be open, try not to be too reactive at this time, take the feedback, but try and calibrate what you are getting. And if you are working on some type of magic, stick to kind of a basic type of meditation, internal navigation, really understanding, maybe some divination practices may be of use for you. And if you are working in the death current, using this as a time of release and finding what are maybe these hidden neuroses that might be in the way, and learning and being humble enough to take feedback, and maybe kind of pre-prepping and being open to that before it starts. So you can start making these notes or being proactive on yourself. Not necessarily the best time to make any business decisions. I take it with that
exactly. Yeah. For these eclipses, you generally don't want to do workings or rituals that have to do with business decisions because it'll give you distorted results. So for example, you might want to get a salary increase of 50% with the upcoming promotion. So you do the ritual, and if you do it on an eclipse, the way it would play out is you would get a 75% salary increase, but you're working 90 hours a week.
I see.
Then there's no point to it, because unless you're massively in debt, you're never going to be able to spend money.
Yeah. Okay.
And then your personal life suffers.
Yes.
And your
exactly.
health suffers.
Okay. Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. That's the theme of doing rituals on an eclipse. Be careful what you wish for, because the results are going to be distorted.
Okay. All right. It's not entirely kind of a trickster. It is, the deal with the devil in that sense, in the old classic, Renaissance kind of ideas that is going to cost your soul in the negative context, so to speak.
Right.
Yes.
Or like a house of mirrors at a carnival.
Oh, that's a perfect correlation, especially with the moon's relationship to it. But so I understand what to do if I'm in the West. If I'm in another part of the world and I'm celebrating Beltane, and I've got that kind of leading up, because now I've kind of like worked up with some new projects that I'm starting and I'm kickstarting, where should my focus be in that part of the world, though?
So for that, it's all about new beginnings and planting seeds.
Okay.
So number one, rolling out new projects.
All right.
Number two, also putting out your feelers for where you can work smarter, not harder.
Mm.
So some of that ties into delegation thinking.
Okay.
And part of that also ties into knowing what tools are available for you.
All
You know, some
right.
people don't realize that they have certain means available to them until somebody points it out.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
a good example of this is Google Calendar.
Yes.
You know, you can set it to give yourself reminders on your smartphone so you never even have to touch a computer.
Mm. Exactly.
But people
Exactly.
don't think about that. I kind of deal with this because if I take a screenshot of something and I want to just circle something on the screenshot, my brain is wired to say, okay, I'm going to pull up Photoshop and I'm going to open the image and I'm going to go in and I'm going to use this brush tool and circle it and save it and send it back to them. It took me a year to rewire my brain to where on my smartphone, it's got editing stuff built in that will do the same damn thing and cut my time by 75%.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I didn't
Oh,
realize that it had evolved to that. And now I use that instead of Photoshop if I'm trying to point things out to people because it's faster.
so this is also a proactive way to kind of like observe those unconscious habits that are kind of getting in your way, because they're going to be a little bit amplified in what's coming ahead. So either you kind of like use the time if you're in this side and you're kind of just clearing and learning to let go of those. But if you're in that side, you're kind of more proactively taking advantage of that. So because you've got more of that kind of summer solar energy kind of moving behind you to kind of back you up with that. So we're already
Exactly.
kind of like hitting this month in that sense. Shall we, let's talk about this month. Let's talk about like what's coming for us besides these super moons that we got to be aware of. We've already kind of like, I think, bitten quite a bit off in this, but where are we going? Yeah, just do it. It is that delicious Taurus, period, right?
Yeah, the month starts off with a decent emphasis in Taurus, and specifically Taurus and Cancer. And I
Mm,
point that out because the first couple weeks, close to the first 3 weeks of the month, is all about good food, good friends, good activities.
that's a
So
good
it's a
sign.
very feel good time.
Mm, mm,
Regardless of whether it's autumn or spring, it's all about making the human to human connection and enjoying those things that bring people together. So enjoying good food or enjoying good drinks or good smoke or whatever the case may be.
yes, yes.
Now, from there, it changes gears into more of the Gemini energy.
Mm,
Uh, May 10th, we see Venus move into Gemini. So watch for more pleasant conversation. Watch for enjoying criticizing things.
okay.
Venus in Gemini, you could almost call it the devil's advocate placement
Ah,
because it'll bring out all those people that like to play devil's advocate and show the rest of the world just how stupid they really are.
this is a
That
perfect
that's a
lineup.
very Venus and Gemini trait, is to critique something with friends and find enjoyment in that.
I see. I imagine that if you're attuned to that and you're proactive with this will also prepare you a bit better for the up and coming supermoon, well, or for the eclipse.
Exactly. Exactly.
So actually
And
capitalize.
right. And at the same time, we still have Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. And Aquarius is an air sign like Gemini is. So it's still more cerebral, it's more social, it's more intellectual. So
Mm,
we go from spending time with friends and family and loved ones doing fun things to now starting to expand our mind and making more of the social connections.
okay,
So
okay.
inspiration, creativity. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it's all about the inspiration and the creativity for the coming year. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's all about the inspiration and the creativity of kind of like a Janus, where you've got one foot in the past year to say, well, what has happened during this astrological year? But then you've got one foot in the future, because now it's time to look ahead at the upcoming seasons.
Correct. Okay. All right. That makes sense. An interesting journey ahead for that. So I'm curious. So we have these 3 supermoons kind of lining up for us. Is that from an overall kind of soul perspective, where is that leading us? I mean, what kind of transition is an individual going through, in your opinion, over this period that's ahead now? Because now we've entered the shift of the seasons. We've shifted into these internal darker times, or the more lighter times, depending on where you find yourself. Is there a significance behind that? Because I mean, we're starting off with, we've got this lunar eclipse in the middle of that, and we've got this super. What does that mean, overall? If I'm kind of pre-planning my life and I want to kind of frame myself.
So you get the supermoon at the end of April. Then there will be the supermoon at the end of May and the supermoon at the end of June.
Okay.
Now, right in the middle, from May 29th until the solstice, June 22nd-ish, Mercury retrogrades.
Ah.
So the supermoon from the end of April until the beginning of the Mercury retrograde is all about doing the things that we just talked about, but in the name of preparing to reevaluate those things.
Okay.
Then the Mercury retrograde comes along, things get brought to our attention to evaluate and change.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last supermoon, the end of June, is right after the Mercury retrograde. So you could use that as a line of demarcation.
All right.
So you've kind of got this little climax kind of build, where the first supermoon, you see what's going on. Then you kind of spend time with friends and family and loved ones. Then the Mercury retrograde happens and you see what changes need made and how to do them. And you do it. And then the final one is like the final leaving the gate.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So if you're planning your life, spend the first 3 weeks in May sitting around the home, or getting together with friends and family, or going out for dinner, or having a drink with loved ones. But know that Mercury retrograde's on the horizon, so don't get complacent. Don't get too comfortable.
All right. But is it in one's advantage to kind of proactively forethought what might be coming and try and solve it now? Or would that actually be a waste of energy, and you should really capitalize on the current that you've got now to kind of give you the fuel?
It would be good to kind of crystal ball what might come up during the Mercury retrograde.
Okay.
Now, this Mercury retrograde is in Gemini. So it's going to be more of a classic Mercury retrograde. And what I mean by that is it's going to be more miscommunication based. It's going to be more open mouth, insert foot. Okay. It's going to be more, if you've been putting off getting your computer maintenance, it's going to shoot craps during the Mercury retrograde.
I see.
So the easy way to prepare for this one is look at the electronics in your life. Have you been putting off dealing with them? If so, there's a good chance they're going to go down during this Mercury retrograde. Have you been putting off having conversations with loved ones that are important? It's going to come up during this Mercury retrograde. So immediately you can see why people have a problem with the Mercury retrograde, because the universe comes along and tells them, you have been irresponsible and now you're paying the price.
Well, this is an important call for me. I just signed a big project, and it's 3 months, so it runs pretty much inside of this entire period.
Congratulations.
It is a technical project, so a lot of technical communication. And this morning I was thinking, we need to do the functional specification portion. this week, but maybe I can move it out. I've changed my mind. I'll be doing the functional specifications and making sure every design is signed off this week. I'm not gonna, I'll have wine with the client.
So part of that too is Mercury retrogrades do bring delays and redos and reevaluates. So if you and the other parties involved are on the same page that it should take 3 months, plan for it to take 3.5 or 4.
Okay. All right.
And even if that's wrong, even if it finishes up in 3 months, then you still got that extra time to do whatever you need to do for you.
Yeah, that little bit of a window. And I think that's important. So if you are taking in commitments in longer projects, consider that. Give yourself that little bit of buffer of time, for and kind of plan miscommunications and changes in project and scope and things like that, just so you're ready for that. I mean, people in the technical industries, we're aware that there's always a little bit of scope creep, but now might be, you've got a little bit of a warm play time. Everyone's in good mood, so to speak.
During the 20 teens, roughly 2013 to 2018 or 2019 or so, I paid attention to what Facebook was doing, and they always rolled out these updates and these changes during a Mercury retrograde. And every time they did, it went horrible.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I just got in the habit of tagging them. Facebook security is usually who I tag because they're going to be the most responsive.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, well, you could have avoided this if you started consulting an astrologer. Now, they never reached out to me, but I have noticed in the last 2 or 3 years, they are rolling out fewer upgrades on a Mercury retrograde.
That's interesting.
So for those of you that spend a lot of time on social media, watch for this. If you wake up one morning and check your feed and there's all kinds of problems with it, it's probably a Mercury retrograde.
No one's safe.
Right.
But at least like we've got a little bit of a primer time to kind of prep us in for that. Besides this, is there anything else we need to be aware of for this cycle for the month of May coming ahead?
So besides that, we've also got Jupiter changing signs, and that's the first time that's happened in a few years.
What does that mean for
Jupiter moves into Pisces on May, basically 14th, 15th, that weekend in there.
Okay.
And Jupiter is the planet of prosperity. It's the planet of the expansion of consciousness and spirituality. So basically, from May 1st until approximately May 28th,
okay,
watch your money.
All right.
Don't make any risky investments. Kind of play things conservative until you see how things are going to play out.
Yeah.
If you don't work with that side of Jupiter, but you work more with the spiritual guru side of Jupiter, expect your spiritual beliefs to be challenged.
Okay.
So you're going to be forced out of your comfort zone. And you and I both know that that's the only place that actual growth happens.
Exactly. So
now, once Jupiter gets settled in Pisces, and it's still months away, but once Jupiter gets settled into Pisces, watch for things to unfold, because Jupiter's one of the ruling planets of Pisces, and Jupiter in Pisces usually means spiritual growth. It usually means getting the lucky breaks when you need them.
Yeah.
So a lot of things are going to line up for people later this year. But sometimes spiritual growth happens in a very rough way. So people thinking, oh, it's rainbows and I'm going to have the secrets of the universe brought to me. No, you're not. You could be laying face down in a gutter realizing you're spending your time with the wrong people. That's how you got there.
Exactly. You're going to get that great body you're after, but after 6 months of forced fat farm, work kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, or having a military general move in with you, and suddenly,
Right, yeah. All of a sudden, your neighbors are up at 8 a.m. doing their yoga workout to didgeridoos, and if you can't
yes,
beat them, join them.
yeah, you can't sleep in anymore, even if you wanted to. You're being
Yeah, even if
forced.
you wanted to.
But that's I think one of the, and this is I think where left hand path psychology done right is so essential, because to me a lot of the more active left hand path thinkers out there is sometimes less occultists, and they're more people like David Goggins, Peter Jordan, or Jordan Peterson, and these are people that kind of embrace the idea of pain and find meaning and power inside of it. Even though Jocko Willink, which is again like it's people that have adopted that psychology of taking the pain, taking the dirt, taking the hardness of life, and that's a core essential idea for me. If you're choosing to be a left hand path practitioner, you're saying I'm fine with not taking that passive, peaceful, slow, systematic over years approach. I'm going to do that intensely. Is Origardi even still called magic the assault upon the kingdom of God? Because it was this, instead of like lifetimes of spirituality, it's this rush in a single lifetime, and you got to rip away the parts. So it's not about being fearful now and saying, because if you're fearful, you're just shutting down. Because one of the principles, and Jocko speaks about this, or sorry, Jordan Belfort speaks about this. Forgive me again, Jordan Peterson speaks about this, and the difference between people going into painful situations and having success and growth versus people going into pain and actually having physical breakdown, and health impact is willingly going into those situations. If you looked at, Jocko's psychology, him going into war was never, oh, I'm being forced against my will to go defend my country or to do my duty. It was, he literally said, when he was a kid, he was playing war games all of his time, and now he was getting paid to play. And he loved the idea of getting punched in the face. And, that was a thing. David Goggins' psychology was different at first, but it very quickly shifted to where he found joy and ecstasy in overcoming his limitations and facing that. And I think to me, that's very much finding the nitsutsut inside of the clip path. And I might be bastardizing the pronunciation a bit, but it's that initial spark, that's inside of the densest, darkest component that turns the manifestation of your Belial, your Beelzebub, your daemon into sacred fire that purifies you. But it does mean that you're going down into the pit, but you're going down into the pit, not with the attitude of I'm going to be defeated, but I'm going in with that is what's going to make me strong enough and good enough and help me uncover the weaknesses I have so that I can break them apart. And I think if you have that attitude from the gate in, you're going to be testing yourself against your coven, against your community, against life, and against yourself all the time. So you're in a much more prime position. So when you, the black magician or left-hand path magician, face the retrograde, it seems to many that you have an unfair gift of the devil. The devil takes care of his own, so to speak. And, the nihilists and people out there that have their kind of propaganda will go like, it's our evil occult power and our secret blessings of all these millions of demons that work for us. And maybe there's a component of that, but maybe the most basic component is that we have an attitude difference that is the distinguishing factor. And kind of like we're coming close to the end of today's episode, I want to ask you a little bit about yours. What is maybe like a kind of belief or a kind of attitude that you've come across when you're facing that kind of negativity or that up and coming drama that just preps you for it, that you're open to it and that you're willing to work with it and transform it versus kind of hiding away from it, so to speak?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned the military, and I use a couple of military phrases that go through my head
Yes.
during those times. The first one is the motto of the SEALs from the United States Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Their motto is "The easy day was yesterday."
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. Yeah, the easy day was yesterday.
And then the other one is used with the, I think, British SAS, and I think the United States Army adapted it too, but I could be wrong about that one. Fortune favors the brave.
That's
So if you
another.
put those two together, whatever train wreck's coming your way, if this is a modified philosophy on the samurai.
Yeah.
You wake up every day expecting to die.
Oh. Oh.
Then when you go to bed, you're thankful for the day that you had.
Mm. This is such a great kind of psychology around this thinning of the veil, in our opening pieces of, sex and death, because, the sexual impulse. I was listening to a talk on impact theory and with Tom Blue, and I forget who the host is that they interviewed, but they were speaking about this. Where science is now exploring the subject of consciousness, and we're recognizing that the biggest problem that we've had exploring this as scientists was we're basically inside of the VR helmet, and we're trying to solve problems that exist outside of the VR helmet with the language from inside. And it's, you're playing GTA 5, and you're not the programmer. You're playing there and you're trying to solve problems in the thing, but you're not thinking at the level of the programmer that literally can change the laws of physics, inside the game, and suddenly the frame is different. And these are ideas, and it opens up this entire probability of conversations. And a couple of interesting ideas there was that they don't look at us as just a singular consciousness, that you're actually a collective of consciousness. And we've just kind of called that because your cells, the bacteria in your stomach, all these have degrees of awareness and functions of their own. And by that definition, we could say that they're conscious to a certain degree. They have a range of it on these progressional levels. So us as the spirit, and I like that occult model that, we're spirit, we're this combination of energy and of consciousness. And, it can be multiple consciousness and multiple fields of energy that produces this singular spirit that then evolves into different stages as it progresses up that line. But that frame, was a very useful one. And I kind of lost my point there because I went on a tangent. But
no, that's a great model. And that's, when you're facing those kind of transitions or you're facing those challenges, that is as important to keep in mind as psyching yourself up to deal with it. Look at whatever it is you're facing from different perspectives. And
yes.
Most people will look at things from their perspective or the perspectives that they can imagine. But they will not look at it from perspectives they cannot imagine.
Yes, because they're locked into the narrative. And I think the thing that we forget is that one of the two old magical principles is that we're supposed to develop the will and the imagination. They're the two most fundamental magical weapons. But we forget that the range of imagination is subjective to the narrative of beliefs that we've got. So that frame really determines what we're even able to imagine. And that's why our magical system should be one that constantly breaks or shifts that frame, shifts the hologram. There was one, and that was kind of like part of the point of that question, how it fits so nicely into what we were saying, is there was one point that Tom kept asking the question, of the scientists. He's like, but why? Why are we driven to do this? Why are we driven towards that? And there's I often say that the first Crowley, I think, said, once you understand that God is sex, sex is God. There's a correlation that he made in terms of that. And to me, it's, if I look at the model of the slayer God, and then it's the anti-God, it's still the tetragrammaton and the four-lettered name, and it's positive or reverse, which is the sexual impulse. And that sexual impulse is the evolutionary impulse. If you look historically, it's every time there's been an evolution in our society, there's been a change in sexual behavior or a liberation in sexuality. And it's always correlated with a change in the arts and the music. And once the arts and the music changes, which is really the magic of the culture, in a deep level, and that sexual intimacy, when those three items together change, there's a change in the political movement, that correlates around that. And it's how we kind of progress in that way. And there's that deep relationship between death and sex, that plays inside of the psyche and is a big discussion point for many aspects of psychology. And I found that inside of that is the spiritual impulse. And when we embrace ourselves wholly, and that's one thing the magical path teaches, that you accept all parts of yourself, the light, the dark, all of it. and you try and integrate or work and refine with those parts. And there's we're talking about these little quotes of power on how do you then embrace that journey. And a quote of Jocko that, he shared in one of his pieces that I liked, he quoted a manual. And the statement that he quoted, it said that in that manual, it said that other than death, all failure is psychological. And that was just a golden kind of nugget for me in that sense. And if you look at it even in the terms of the occult worldview, that we're making a friend even of death. We make a friend even of the negative gods and these, dark things, and that's the difference between the left-hand path sorcerer. Is the demons are not my enemies. It's not me against the devil. It's me aligning both heaven and hell inside of my matrix. As a single force by which I go into the world to manifest the unmanifest. To cast my spell upon reality, by writing a narrative that overarches the false narratives that are living inside. And I think that core mentality, that core idea we find so richly in the ancient archetypes, of the old world. And that was, the kind of idea that I want to close on, because I find that there was two attitudes that are, to me, a core difference between failure and success. And it's the one that kind of goes on your knees and you apologize. I'm sorry, please, God, Jesus, whoever, forgive me. I was wrong. I was bad. Make it go away. And I think that's a misrepresentation of the philosophy of surrender, that we touched on. And, surrender is really that letting go of the need, the exhaustion and the magic, the death. That's when you surrender. That's when you finally actually trust and you allow the rest of your matrix to kind of come into play, versus the old kind of like Viking mentality. The Viking mentality already surrendered. My fate was already in the hands of the greater forces. The work's already done. I just have to go and do it at my absolute best and live my absolute fullest, and be 100% in there. Otherwise, I'm not being true to my destiny, kind of a thing.
Right.
And I think that's a kind of a golden thing there. So I think we're kind of, hit the end of our session for today. Bill, is there any kind of like closing thoughts that we need to consider for the month that we didn't touch on? Or any
the
important...
only one that might be of note to some people is if you work with the fixed star Sirius, sometimes pronounced Sirius, Mars is going to be conjunct it May 15th through the 19th. What that means is it's just a perfect time to reach out to those Sirius energies, whether you consider them aliens or just the principles of Sirius as they've been handed down from the Dogon tribes all the way to the present times. There is going to be about a 4-day window in the middle of May that you can work with that.
Sure, that sounds kind of very interesting, especially considering the eclipse. So the attunement in the dark energy, the moving through dark matter, the working through that kind of what we perceive as a clipothic dimension, which can also be perceived as an alien kind of level or access point. So I think for anybody that's in their more advanced degrees or more advanced levels of experience, especially ones that are higher levels with goethic forces and things like that, this may be an actually very powerful time to forge those relationships. But I think this gives such a key idea because of mental stability, and keeping yourself sane if you are working those currents. Because I think any of us that have had encounters, with deeper levels of those manifestations realizes how some of those things can be more real than this world, in the moment of that manifestation. And, and I think if your relationship with your lunar dimension, if you haven't dealt with it, because this is, again, is a big subject, I think, in occultism, because it is the mental health subject, and if you haven't resolved these narcissistic aspects and you haven't resolved, this is going to be dangerous for you. So, realize that that's why we say that is an advanced piece of working. That's why I think for people listening, that's why that's more stuff that you do as an adept. You've done some training, you've gone your work, you've resolved you're not still struggling this God versus the devil rubbish in your head. You've resolved these inner false narratives, and you're at a place where you're casting a more powerful narrative on your world without that fear of, am I going to be accepted? Then when you're there now, I think you're at a place where you can kind of explore these dimensions more deeply.
Right.
Maybe we can discuss that subject in the future in a bit more detail. I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Oh, sounds good to me. I'm not
Perfect.
saying it was aliens. No offense, Giorgio, if you're listening.
Interesting discussion. Bill, thank you so much for popping on again today. I'm looking forward to next month. And I know you've got a couple of exciting books coming at us in the next few months. And I believe from our previous chats, they kind of fit directly after these conjunctions of these super moons, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do. And they're going to be fun when they come out.
You can see an astrologer has his publication dates perfectly planned.
Damn right.
Works perfect. We'll have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you next month.
You too. Thanks for having me on, and I'll chat with you soon.
I've always felt a little different, a little uneasy between regular folk, a bit of a dreamer, a lost cause, a little non-ordinary, some would say. I think I've always just been this way. My mother said I was special. My father thought I should be feared. But I knew that witchcraft coursed through my veins the first time I tasted the lips of the goddess inside the rain. Yes, I'm a witch, it's true. And sure, we are the ones who believe in the beauty of nature, who believe in the things science, absent of art, cannot explain, who instead of religion would have romance. And sure, you may think we have lost our way, when in the world of predictable things we have such unfamiliar things that we would like to say. But maybe in a world so cold and alone, a little unfamiliar is exactly what is needed to show us the way home.
Hey family, it's Adam Knox here. Thanks for supporting this podcast and these ideas. I really appreciate free thinkers, like yourselves, that are willing to challenge conventional norms and think for themselves and take on new challenges and look at new ideas. And as such, I want to say that if you haven't yet, if you are looking at ways to improve your knowledge over the entire field and you're looking at a regular feed of ideas and concepts to keep improving yourself, I'd like to invite you to sign up at the Cult of You. All my teachings and all my ideas are there for only $19 a month, and every month I bring you a completely new section of some of the most cutting ideas, and I'm constantly adding to that. So I'm constantly reviewing and adding more knowledge as I gain them, and you'll see a lot of the interviews and a lot of things that I do extend on some of the subjects that I cover inside of those areas. I do take quite a bit of effort to make sure that the filming is also quite good, and to give you not just a demonstration of rituals, but also talk you through the psychology behind them so that you're empowered to do them. And I cover every subject under the sun, from science to art to magic to all the different systems out there, from the Golden Dawn to the Western traditions to the left-hand path traditions. We discuss technology and technomancy. We discuss sex magic and seduction. We discuss so much more, from purely the mental aspects to how do you deal with the darkness when it comes up, as well as how do you take those things into business and into your romantic life, as well as what are the keys to make your magic work, as well as to unlock different degrees of spirituality. So if you haven't yet, please consider signing up at the Cult of You, and you'll be able to send me a mail and message there, and I'll be there to help you personally through mail correspondence and chat you and guide you through the entire process. And if you make it through the first year of the entire cycle and you graduate to the second year of the program, you're able to have direct sessions with myself and some of the members of my temple. And I look forward to helping you whether you go that route or not. Please keep enjoying these podcasts. Please share them with people that you think they're going to find value in them. Like and subscribe to the show. And please send me your messages to info@thecultofyou. I would love to hear what are things that are important to you. What are ideas and concepts that this raised? Maybe this inspired you. Maybe this made sense to you. Maybe this opened up something. I'd love to hear that. Please talk to me and please share with me. Write in the comments and give me your ideas and concepts. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, if you're only watching this on the YouTube channel, please head on over to Spotify and do subscribe. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, go check us out on YouTube. But please share these ideas and these concepts, and let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear from you. That's it for me. I'm Adam Knox. This is The Cult of You, and remember, live deliciously.